October 27, 1942. Daybreak in the South Pacific Ocean, about 20 miles northeast of Guadalcanal. Commander Edward P. Parker held the railing of the USS Northampton as he saw the fiery wreck of the USS Hornet sink below the water, carrying with it 140 American sailors and the final working fleet carrier in the Pacific. The flames from her burst fuel tanks lit up the water for miles, making the sea a mirror of fire that showed the disaster facing American sea power. 4 carriers in 10 months. At this pace, we'll have nothing left by Christmas, he noted in his private journal. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. Words that would have gotten him a court-martial for hopelessness if his superiors found them. Through the smoke and gloom, he had just seen the 4th American Fleet Carrier go down in 1942. Lexington at Coral Sea on May 8th, Yorktown at Midway on June 7th, Wasp torpedoed off Guadalcanal on September 15th, and now Hornet at Santa Cruz on October 27th. The Imperial Japanese Navy, which American spies had brushed off as lesser copycats unable to create anything new, had methodically wrecked more than half of America's Pacific carrier group. In shipyards from Yokosuka to Kure, Japanese laborers were adding new carriers to their navy, while America was losing ships faster than anyone imagined. 700 miles away in Newport News, Virginia, a welder by the name of Margaret Thompson was about to start a night shift that would prove Commander Parker mistaken. What neither of them realized was that this moment of greatest hopelessness was the start of the most amazing production wonder in naval history, a methodical display of American industrial ability that would change not just the Pacific War, but the very way of sea power itself. The formula for winning was about to be changed not by battle plans or better skill at sea, but by welding torches, assembly lines, and the huge manufacturing power of a democracy that had at last woken up to war. The promise. The fall of American carrier power in 1942 would set off a reaction so overpowering that Japanese naval officers would later say it was like fighting the stars themselves. No matter how many you took out, more showed up. Within 3 years, American shipyards would put out 14 Essex-Class fleet carriers that saw fighting, more than Japan made in the whole war. The change from disaster to dominance would not happen through smart moves or new inventions, but through something more basic: the complete gathering of American industrial democracy, turning homemakers into welders, farm boys into ship fitters, and changing the whole country into what Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had feared most: a weapons supply of endless productive ability. Context: the building disaster. The trouble had started on May 8, 1942, in the Coral Sea. The USS Lexington, one of America's 2 huge pre-war carriers made from battlecruiser frames, took 2 torpedo hits and 3 bomb strikes from Japanese carrier planes. Despite brave damage control work that at first saved the ship, gas fumes from broken airplane fuel tanks set off huge secondary blasts. Lady Lex went down with 216 of her crew, America's first fleet carrier loss of the war. Captain Frederick Sherman, Lexington's commanding officer, would later state before Congress, "We went to war with 7 fleet carriers in the Pacific. The Japanese began with 10. Every admiral knew the numbers. We couldn't afford to trade one for one, much less lose them faster than the enemy." The second hit came just a month later. On June 7, 1942, the USS Yorktown, bravely patched up after Coral Sea damage in only 48 hours at Pearl Harbor, gave way to Japanese submarine 168's torpedoes after the carrier's vital part in the Midway victory. Though Midway was a strategic win with 4 Japanese carriers sunk, America had lost one of her valuable few fleet carriers. September 15th brought the 3rd disaster when the USS Wasp, working off Guadalcanal, took 3 torpedoes from Japanese submarine, 19. The carrier burned for hours before being sunk on purpose by the American destroyer. Lansdowne, of the 7 fleet carriers ready in the Pacific at the war's beginning, America had now lost 3. Then came the final hit. October 26th to 27th, 1942, the Battle of Santa Cruz. The USS Hornet, a seasoned ship from the Doolittle Raid and Midway, fell to organized Japanese dive bomber and torpedo plane attacks. Despite frantic attempts to save her, including an effort to tow the burning carrier to safety, approaching Japanese surface ships forced them to leave her. Japanese destroyers Makigumo and Akigumo finished what their planes had begun in the early morning of October 27th. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, faced Congress with plain figures. "Gentlemen, we have one working fleet carrier in the Pacific, the Enterprise. She is up against 10 Japanese carriers. Simple numbers tell us we have already lost the war." The production wonder starts. But King didn't know about Margaret Thompson and the 1.7 million workers who would pour into American shipyards by 1944. He didn't know about Henry Kaiser, who was about to shorten Liberty shipbuilding time from 230 days to 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. He didn't know that American shipyards, which had put out exactly one fleet carrier in 1941, were about to do what seemed couldn't be done. The change started not in military planning rooms, but in the accounting offices of Newport News Shipbuilding. On December 8, 1941, one day after Pearl Harbor, Yard Supervisor Clay Bedford called a crisis meeting with his foreman. "Forget everything you know about shipbuilding," he said. "We're going to build carriers, like Ford builds cars." The complete change began with a simple comment from Helen Matthews, a former seamstress who had just been taken on as part of the emergency growth. Watching skilled workers painstakingly rivet hull plates in place, she asked her boss, "Why don't you sew it together like cloth, one unbroken line instead of thousands of dots?" The boss laughed, then paused. Welding instead of riveting could cut assembly time by 75%. But welding needed different skills, easier skills, skills that could be taught to anyone in days instead of the years it took to train a master riveter. The production boom. By summer 1943, the Essex-Class carriers were coming off the production lines at a speed that was hard to believe. The USS Essex herself had been started on April 28, 1941, and put into service on December 31, 1942, just 20 months from start to combat ready. But that was only the start. At Brooklyn Navy Yard, shipfitter First Class Giuseppe Diageo, cousin of the baseball star, led a team that created a new method for putting in aircraft elevators. Instead of making them in place piece by piece, they put together whole elevator platforms on land, then lifted them into place with huge cranes. Time saved, 6 weeks per carrier. The methods first developed at Richmond by Henry Kaiser spread across the industry. Building parts beforehand meant that deck houses and other fittings were put together in production areas where they could be built on their sides or upside down, making welding simpler and stronger. What had taken 1,000 workers a month now took 200 workers a week. The numbers began to build up with scary speed. USS Yorktown CV-10 started December 1, 1941, put into service. April 15, 1943. USS Intrepid started. December 1, 1941. Put into service. August 16, 1943. USS Hornet CV-12 started. August 3, 1942. Put into service. November 29, 1943. USS Franklin started. December 7, 1942. Put into service. January 31, 1944. Each launch got faster. Philippa Kellogg, a welder at Bethlehem Steel's Four River Shipyard, kept a journal that caught the speeding up. January 1943, we're launching a carrier every 60 days. June 1943, every 45 days. December 1943, every 30 days. The Japs must think we're using magic, the human wave. The magic was people. By April 1943, 40% of the laborers on Kaiser's shipways and prefabrication sites were women. At Norfolk Naval Shipyard, Emma Rodriguez, a Mexican-American mother of 3 who had never held a tool bigger than a sewing needle, became the quickest riveter in the yard. She could drive 30 rivets in a minute, every one perfect. African-American workers, formerly banned from skilled shipyard jobs, poured into the yards after Executive Order 8802, banning unfair treatment in defense industries. James Washington, a tenant farmer from Alabama, became a master pipe fitter at Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. He put in the fuel lines on 5 carriers, each one done faster than the one before. The workers weren't just making ships. They were working against time itself. Every day without carriers meant more American sailors and Marines dying on islands across the Pacific. Hung on every shipyard wall were pictures from the fleet. USS Enterprise fights alone. She needs sisters. Build them now. The technology change. Speed came not just from human work, but from new production methods. At New York Naval Yard, engineers created building in sections. Instead of making a carrier from the bottom up piece by piece, they built whole parts complete with wiring, plumbing, and airflow, then put them together like giant building blocks. Production was made more efficient by using very uniform parts, cutting building time to as little as 14 months for the fastest builds. Every carrier used the same pumps, the same electrical panels, the same fittings whenever possible. Parts made in Detroit could be put in carriers being built in Newport News, Brooklyn, or Philadelphia without changes. The Essex Swarm. The Essex-Class would become the most important class of warships in American naval history. These weren't just stand-ins for lost carriers. They were bigger, faster, more able than anything that had come before. Each weighed 27 to 100 tons, could hold 90 to 100 planes, and could travel at 33 knots faster than most destroyers. The Japanese saw it right away. Commander Masatake Yokomiya, air staff officer with the Japanese Combined Fleet, wrote in his journal after getting spy reports, "The Americans are building carriers faster than we can train pilots. Each new carrier is better than anything we have. We are not fighting the same Navy that we attacked at Pearl Harbor." By March 1944, American shipyards had done the impossible, launching Essex-class carriers at a speed that was greater than the combined carrier production of every other country on Earth, the Kaiser Wonder. While the main naval yards built fleet carriers, Henry Kaiser changed the way escort carriers were built, the jeep carriers that would give air cover for invasion fleets and hunt submarines. Kaiser's Vancouver shipyard alone would make 50 escort carriers using methods created for Liberty ships. Escort carrier USS Casablanca, the first ship of the largest class of carriers ever built, went from start to service in less than 8 months. In contrast, Japanese escort carrier Shino, changed from a passenger liner, took 2 years to finish. The supply chain network. Behind every rivet, every weld, every steel plate was a supply network that went across the continent. The steel for carrier flight decks came from Pittsburgh, where mills ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The aluminum for planes came from Alcoa plants in Tennessee, using more electricity than whole cities. In Akron, Ohio, the Goodyear plant made carrier landing cables, each one able to stop a 12,000 lb fighter going at 100 mph. Plant manager William Davis pushed production from 10 cables per month in 1942 to 200 per month by 1944. The training pipeline. Ships without crews were no good. The answer came from Captain Daniel Gallery, who suggested using the Great Lakes as a training area. USS Wolverine and USS Sable, paddle wheel steamers turned into training carriers, worked from Chicago's Navy Pier. By 1944, these two ships were certifying 500 pilots per month. The Japanese viewpoint. In Tokyo, the Imperial Naval Staff watched the spy reports with increasing dread. Captain Toshikazu Omi, operations officer for the Combined Fleet, later stated, "We knew America would build ships to replace their losses. We guessed they might build 6 or 7 fleet carriers by 1945. The real number was beyond understanding." Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa, leading the Japanese carrier force at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, faced 9 American fleet carriers and 8 light carriers with his 6 carriers. "It was not a battle," he later wrote. "It was a slaughter." The production peak. By January 1945, American shipyards had found a pace that seemed impossible. Brooklyn Navy Yard was working on 3 carriers at the same time. Newport News had carriers in different stages of being built on 6 different slipways. USS Lake Champlain set the final record among wartime completions. Put into service June 3, 1945, after just 15 months of construction, the human cost and triumph. The speed came with loss. Shipyard accidents took the lives of over 3,000 workers during the war. Margaret O'Brien lost her husband when a crane cable broke at Four River Shipyard. She went back to work the next week, taking his spot on the welding team. "Every ship we don't build means more gold stars and windows," she told her crew. The shock of victory. The Japanese surrender group arriving on the USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, had to sail past an American fleet that was unbelievable. Over 100 carriers of all kinds filled Tokyo Bay and the nearby waters. more carriers than all other nations together had built in the whole history of naval aviation. Commander Tamichihara, one of Japan's most honored destroyer captains, wrote, "We had sunk 4 of their carriers in 1942, and they had replaced each one 3 times over." The production numbers, the final count of Essex-Class carriers that saw fighting in World War II, put into service and saw combat. USS Essex, CV-9, December 31, 1942. USS Yorktown, CV-10, April 15, 1943. USS Intrepid, CV-11, August 16, 1943. USS Hornet, CV-12, November 29, 1943. USS Franklin, CV-13, January 31, 1944. USS Ticonderoga, CV-14, May 8, 1944. USS Randolph, CV-15, October 9, 1944. USS Lexington, CV-16, February 17, 1943. USS Bunker Hill, CV-17, May 24, 1943. USS Wasp, CV-18, November 24, 1943. USS Hancock, CV-19, April 15, 1944. USS Bennington, CV, 20 August 6, 1944. USS Bonhomme, Richard, CV-31, November 26, 1944. USS Shangri-La, CV-38, September 15, 1944. Additional carriers put into service but saw no combat. USS Boxer, April 16, 1945. USS Lake Champlain, June 3, 1945. USS Antietam, January 28, 1945. Several more were put into service after the war was over. This number didn't include 9 Independence-class light carriers built on cruiser frames or over 100 escort carriers made during the same time. The technology transfer. The big change in shipbuilding transformed American industry forever. Methods created for wartime production, building in sections, automatic welding, assembly line shipbuilding became common practice. Workers trained in shipyards became the foundation of post-war American industry. Women who had learned to weld found they could handle any industrial job. African Americans who had been limited to lowly work before the war had shown they could do exact work. The strategic effect. By 1945, American carrier production had reached levels that were more than was needed for operations. Ships were being finished faster than crews could be trained. Admiral William Halsey stated to Congress in 1946, "We went from having too few carriers to having more than we could use. No country in history has ever made combat ships at such a speed." The workers' legacy. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of VJ Day, a get-together was held at Newport News Shipbuilding. Over 5,000 former workers came. Margaret Thompson, the welder from our opening, now 67 years old, stood before the group. "They call us the finest generation now. We weren't fine. We were angry. The Japanese sank our ships, killed our boys. We answered the only way we knew how. We built more ships than they could dream of. Every rivet we drove said, 'Remember Pearl Harbor.'" The economic and social change. The carrier building program changed not just military ability, but the whole American economy and society. Richmond, California's population went from 23,000 to 130,000 in 3 years. The money paid to shipyard workers, over $3 billion in pay, went through the economy, building the American middle class. The shipyards broke down social walls that had been around for generations, showing that women could do industrial work, and African Americans had the same skills as anyone else when given the chance. The numerical dominance. By August 1945, the United States Navy ran 14 Essex-Class fleet carriers that had seen combat. 3 more Essex-Class carriers put into service but not in combat. 9 Independence-Class light carriers, 71 escort carriers, plus pre-war carriers still in operation. This force compared to Japan's 6 working carriers, most without trained pilots, and Britain's 19 carriers of all kinds. The ultimate proof. In 1962, Rear Admiral Hideo Yano of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force visited Norfolk Naval Shipyard, where many Essex-Class carriers had been built. Standing where the USS Yorktown had been launched, Yano said through a translator, "We knew you were building ships, but we never dreamed of this scale. How do you fight a country that can build in one yard what we built in our whole empire? We didn't lose to your Navy. We lost to your factories, your workers, your resolve to produce beyond all logical limits. The final count. Admiral Chester Nimitz gave the final summary. The war was settled in 1943, not by any battle, but by the launching of new carriers. When we could lose a carrier and have 2 replacements already at sea, while Japan could not replace any losses, the result was mathematically sure. Today, the mark of that production wonder lives on. The methods first used in 1942 to 1945 are still standard in shipbuilding. But maybe the most important mark is the display of what democratic societies can do when joined in a common goal. In 36 months, America went from having 4 carriers sunk and facing possible defeat to holding overpowering carrier control that made victory certain. The workers who did this wonder showed that democracy's greatest weapon isn't military strength, but productive ability. The power of free people to outbuild, outproduce, and in the end, overpower oppression. The change from 4 carriers lost to 14 Essex-Class carriers in combat stands as history's greatest example of industrial reaction to a military crisis. Those workers are nearly all gone now, but what they did remains. In humanity's darkest time, when fascism threatened to put out freedom, American workers answered with the greatest rush of productive power ever seen. The 4 carriers lost in 1942, Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet, were not just replaced, but multiplied. Each new carrier was better than what was lost. Each one a tribute to democracy's ability to turn disaster into a win. In the end, Japan didn't lose to American strategy or plans. They lost to Margaret Thompson and her welding torch, to millions of Americans who proved that democracy's final strength is in the endless productive power of a free people joined in a common goal. From 4 carriers lost to 14 Essex-Class carriers in combat, the numbers tell a story of change that stands as history's greatest proof of what free people can do when their freedom is in danger. They didn't just build ships, they built victory, freedom, and the future. Their legacy floats forever in the words written on the memorial at Newport News Shipbuilding. Here, American workers answered oppression with steel, fascism with freedom, and defeat with the greatest production wonder in human history.